Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Pro Wrestling Chat. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen. This week we are discussing my Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. It's the number one question that people ask when it comes to pro wrestling is, what's your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling? Well, here's mine, guys. And there might be a couple shockers for you out there. So if I omitted anyone from this list that you feel belongs, let me hear what your Mount Rushmore Pro Wrestling is down in the chat of this video. So, before we get started, I'm going to say a couple honorable mentions that just barely missed the cut. And that being, Don't Kill Me, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yeah, he just misses the list because there are four that I like just a little bit better than him. But there's no question that he had an amazing career, and in my opinion, he single-handedly saved the WWE from getting defeated by WCW, and taken over. Because I feel that he is the number one reason that they survived. When I first saw him getting in Mike Tyson's face and talking smack and giving him the finger, I'm like, wow, holy crap. This guy is for real. And he just always felt so authentic as well, He really felt like he was being himself, that he was just this kind of redneck badass, and he kind of is that way in real life, just amped up a little. And next I would say is The Undertaker. Yes, The Undertaker just misses the cut here. I have to be honest, I respect The Undertaker more than I actually, like him. I have so much respect for him. He had an incredible career, and I do like him, but I just never really got that into his character, honestly. And to be honest, I was never a huge fan of the Attitude Era in general. I always thought it was like sleazy or too cheesy or too out there or too ridiculous, for my personal taste, Other than like Stone Cold. And the next guy I'm going to say, The Rock, of course, Dwayne Johnson, who is now a massive movie star. He's kind of left wrestling in the past. He makes appearances once in a while, He did come back recently at last year's WrestleMania as the final boss character, and he made a few appearances, but yeah. Really, he was only huge in the business as a wrestler for maybe 5 years or so. But man, what a huge run, and his rivalries with Stone Cold and The Undertaker and Mankind, Mick Foley. Who was another guy that you could put on there? Mick Foley had such a great career, and you've got the three faces of Foley with the hardcore legend, Cactus Jack and Dude Love and Mankind, and of course just Mick Foley. He had some great runs, and WCW, and of course his biggest run was in WWE, and he had that legendary steel cage match with The Undertaker. That was, when he went through the cage onto the floor, and The Undertaker threw him off the top of the cage. It was just insane. The Hell in a Cell match is legendary. Yeah, those are probably my honorable mentions. Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. So my first entrant into the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling for me is, of course, the Hulkster. Hulkamania will live forever. Rest in peace, brother. And I don't think anybody in the history of professional wrestling had a bigger career than, a more storied, legendary career than that of Hulk Hogan, of course. Terry Bollea. Not only was he the greatest baby face of all time, in my opinion, but the greatest heel of all time when he turned heel and turned into Hollywood Hulk Hogan as the leader of the New World Order, which just which that storyline absolutely took over professional wrestling and was the main reason why the WCW was winning in the ratings during the Monday Night Wars back in the 90s. And they reigned supreme for 2 years mainly because of the NWO and Hulk Hogan as the leader. So, incredible career that goes back to the 70s, the late 70s, and when he was doing all the different territories like Memphis Wrestling and, all that, AEWA, and then, of course, the massive run, the biggest run of all time in WWF back then it was called, which is now WWE. Hulkamania was born in 1984 when he beat the Iron Sheik and went on a incredible run and reigned as champion for 4 years straight. Yes, Roman Reigns did not beat his record. So, came really close, but yeah, and then of course, towards the late 80s, early 90s, Hulkamania started getting dry. People started getting tired of it, and he ended up leaving, and he went over to the WCW. And Hulkamania went wild there for a little bit, but it seemed that in the 90s that he was he didn't quite fit in with that era. He was kind of a real 80s thing of its time. So he had to reinvent himself, and he absolutely did with the Hollywood Hulk Hogan character, wearing the black and white, talking trash like nobody else, and running roughshod all over the WCW with the New World Order. Okay, next entrant into the Mount Rushmore is another no-brainer, I would say, and that is the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, of course. I can't imagine anybody not including Ric Flair on the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. What an incredible career. Mid-70s, and of course, I would say his biggest run was with the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. When he was world champion the first time, he just literally was the world champion. He went all over the world defending his championship all throughout all the different territories like the AWA and the Memphis Wrestling and all that stuff. So he literally was like the world champion, because he went all over the world and defended the championship. Japan, no matter what. And he just had so many incredible promos, and his promo style was just amazing. The rich, kiss-stealing, wheeling and dealing, jet-riding son of a gun, just hilarious. I think the funniest one that he ever did, in my opinion, when he talked about his shoes. My shoes cost more than your house. Oh man, he was decked out in beautiful, $500 suits, and and he was literally living the lifestyle in real life, riding the private jets and the limousines and partying like a rock star, and he was just infamous for being a ladies' man and a partier, and then you had that legendary faction, the Four Horsemen, with Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and many people were that fourth man. Many different people played the fourth man, like Sting at one time, Lex Luger at one time, Mongo McMichael at one time, But yeah, it was always Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Ric Flair. I think Barry Windham once was in the Four Horsemen. Yeah, so many people were in the Four Horsemen, but obviously you can't have the Four Horsemen without Ric Flair, the Nature Boy. Now, his gimmick, he did kind of take a little bit from the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, who came out with the robe, and he was kind of flamboyant, but I think Ric Flair brought a lot more personality to the character. The bleach blonde hair, he had such a great look about him, and obviously charisma for days. And he's notorious for having so many 1-hour matches, which I don't think many people can say that. He had thousands of 1-hour long matches and even more. I think the greatest match of all time that I ever saw was him versus Ricky Steamboat in the Chi-Town Rumble in 1989, I believe it was. It was either 88 or 89. I'm pretty sure it was 89, but obviously they had so many classic matchups and so many great rivalries. Him and Ricky Steamboat, and of course him and Sting, and Lex Luger, and Barry Windham, and Dusty Rhodes, of course. Yeah, so many legendary rivalries in wrestling, and even when it became the WCW, he was still, like, once it first became WCW, taking over from NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, he was still the man at that time, you know. Until contract negotiations soured and he ended up going over to WWF for about a year and a half or so, where he had a huge run and he was two-time WWF champion. And he had a great run where he was in the Royal Rumble and he lasted the entire match and ended up winning the championship in the Royal Rumble. Yeah, so the Royal Rumble he was in was actually for the World Championship, which was really cool. I don't think they've ever done that since. I'd like to see that again. But yeah, Ric Flair, I mean, his career went on to, you know, he stayed with WCW till it closed in 2001. And then he went over to WWE. Where he was mostly, like, I think he was the general manager for a while of Raw or SmackDown. I can't remember what it was. But, yeah, he worked under Vince McMahon, and then he would wrestle once in a while, but he did ended up joining the faction called Evolution with the young Randy Orton and the Triple H, of course. And, yeah, they were a really good faction. And also Batista, yeah. So that was probably his last great run, was part of Evolution, where he did have some solid matches, including against Hulk Hogan on SmackDown, I think it was. Alright, next up. This one might be a shocker. I don't see him on a lot of Mount Rushmores. Once in a while you might see him, but to me, no doubt about it, the Macho Man, Randy Savage. Yeah. Dig it! Absolute legend. The most colorful character in the history of wrestling, probably, with his wild, brash outfits and robes, and his incredible charisma that's just second to none, you know. Some of the most famous promos you'd ever seen, like, cup of coffee in the big time, or I'm the cream of the crop. Yeah. Rest in peace, the late great Randy Macho Man Savage, of course. Probably my favorite rivalry in wrestling was him against Hulk Hogan. And of course, that legendary run with Hulk Hogan as a tag team called the Mega Powers. And they had Miss Elizabeth as their manager, and they had a great run for about a year. And of course, things fell apart and the Mega Powers exploded. And they fought for the World Championship at WrestleMania 5 in a classic matchup. And their rivalry spilled over to WCW as well. And it was like kind of the same thing. They teamed up, and they were the Mega Powers again. And then once he became Hollywood Hogan, things went bad, and they ended up fighting. Sometimes he was on the NWO, sometimes he was against the NWO. But yeah. Macho Man had a great run in WCW as well, where he won the championship several times, and he ended up completely reinvented himself in late 99 to 2000, 2001, just before they closed. You know, he kind of really reinvented his character. He got really super jacked, you know, he wore like these sequin outfits, you know, he had a totally different look about him, you know. But I mean, so many great rivalries, like against the Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts, so many classic matchups. Obviously, WrestleMania 3 comes to mind when he went against Ricky Steamboat. Had probably the most talked about match outside of Hulk versus Andre. and great rivalries with Tito Santana. Anyone you can think of when I put his career up against anybody, Several-time champion in WWF and WCW. So Macho Man Randy Savage, one of the absolute greatest. And last but certainly not least, which is another one that I don't see on a lot of people's Mount Rushmore, and I don't really understand why, but for me it's the Stinger, baby. Steve Borden, Sting, the icon, the man called Sting. I just think had an absolutely incredible career, He started out in the indies and the territory scene, teaming up with the Ultimate Warrior, who back then they were called, what was their name? Bad Influence or something like that. Yeah. And he lived with Ultimate Warrior. They were roommates and they traveled the world together throughout the indie scene. And they ended up splitting off and going their own ways, and Ultimate Warrior ended up going to, of course, the WWF. And Sting went over to NWA, which it was called at the time. And, he really started to get steam. And he had a totally different look back then. He was like the Surfer Sting with the spiked blonde hair and the war paint, similar to that of Ultimate Warrior, because, they did start together. But he just had such charisma. He was basically the Hulk Hogan of the WCW for a long, long time until, the NWO came out, and then he was the one man going against the NWO, and he himself was kind of a dark, brooding character. He had that, crow look, like the Crow with the white face paint. He didn't talk, and you always see him hanging out up in the rafters with a vulture on his shoulder or a baseball bat, and he always come down from the rafters and attack the NWO and take them all out. And he was the one guy, that one guiding light against the NWA, and he was such a great character, So he had so many different runs, and many times he reinvented himself for the pro wrestling fans, so he remained relevant. And, of course, once WCW folded, he ended up going to TNA Wrestling, where he had a great long run for 10, 11 years. He was with TNA Wrestling, and he helped really put them on the map. Once he joined TNA, that's when I started, getting interested in watching TNA Wrestling. I was just like, wow, that's a huge deal. They signed Sting, That's awesome. Because many people thought Sting would go to WWF like a lot of the others did, but he never did. He went down with the ship when so many people left, He did not abandon ship. He stayed with WCW until it died once and for all. But he had a great run in TNA, and then he also went eventually to the WWF years later, but he had a kind of a brief run, unfortunately, but he did have that huge match at WrestleMania against Triple H, and you saw the DX coming in, you saw the NWO coming in. It was such a nostalgia match, but also a great match as well, and I believe they had 100,000 fans at that WrestleMania, so that he did have that one big match in the WWE, but it was definitely a brief run, cut short by injury when he had a match against Seth Rollins, and Seth Rollins gave him the buckle bomb, and it just shattered him, and he was just I think he had a stroke or something. He had some kind of seizure or something, but he fell down, and it was scary, and then he retired from the WWE after that, and we thought his career was completely done. We thought he was retired because he started doing indie shows and doing signings and speaking, but he didn't wrestle anymore. But he came back in AEW years later. And so yeah, he had a nice run in AEW there. Did mostly tag team matches. He was a tag team with Darby Allin for quite a while, you know. And he even teamed up with Adam Copeland, who you used to know as Edge in the WWE, of course. And yeah, he didn't do too many singles matches that I can think of. He did mostly tag team, but you know, because he was getting older, he didn't want to risk injury, you know. But he was still quite spry in the ring, I must say. And he did have one final match, one big send-off in AEW, and that was nice. He came out with his sons dressed up like, you know, different versions of him, dressed as the Surfer Sting, one of them, and one of them is dressed like the NWO Sting. Really cool, really fun. And it was really a nice way to go out. And yeah, he did finally retire after that. Now he's kind of relaxing. You know, he does some appearances here and there at some indie shows. But yeah, what an absolute career. So yes, it will always be showtime for the Stinger and at the 4th entry in my Mount Rushmore. So that's it, guys. That's my Mount Rushmore Professional Wrestling. So let me know what are your picks for the Mount Rushmore in the comments below of this video. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Pro Wrestling Chat. Tune in and lock up.